Welcome to a place where memories breathe and shadows speak. Today's story is a long journey into the heart of a family lost in time. If you find yourself touched by this tale, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment letting us know where you are watching from. Your presence is the light in our stories. Now settle in and let's travel back to the House of Grey Mists. June 14th, 1995, Leo laughed today. Truly laughed, not just a giggle, but a deep, belly shaking sound that made the birds in the garden stop their singing just to listen. He is 5 now, and the world is a wonder to him. He spent the morning following a ladybug across the porch. He named it Sir Spots. Julian says, I spoil him. But how can you not spoil a miracle? Every time he touches the piano keys, my heart skips. He has my hands, he has my soul. August 2nd, 1995. We went to the creek today. The water was silver in the afternoon sun. Leo threw pebbles into the current and asked me where they go. I told him they go to the ocean to see the whales. He looked at me with those wide, trusting eyes and said, Mommy, will the water ever take me to see the whales too? I shivered, even though the sun was hot. I clutched him to my chest and whispered, Never, I will never let you go. Reading these words felt like a betrayal. I had never known this woman. The mother in these pages was vibrant, loving, and full of light. The woman sitting downstairs in the armchair was a hollow shell, a burnt out star. I realized then that my mother didn't just lose a son, she had died with him that day. The journal entries became more frantic as they approached the date of the accident. The handwriting was jagged, stained with what I realized were tears that had dried decades ago. November 12th, 1995. The storm is coming. I can feel it in my bones. The wind is howling like a wounded animal. Leo is restless. He wants to see the big waves. Julian is busy with the grandfather clock for the Nair. I should have said no. I should have locked the doors. But Leo, he has a way of making you want to give him the moon. I turned the page, my hand shaking. The next entry was dated 3 weeks later. It consisted of only one sentence, written so hard the pen had torn the paper. The silence is the loudest thing I have ever heard. I sat on the dusty attic floor and closed my eyes, letting the journal's words build a movie in my mind. I saw them. A younger version of my father, his face not yet etched with bitterness, a younger mother, her hair caught in the wind, and a little boy in a yellow raincoat, a bright spark against the gray November sky. They had gone to the pier. The waves were crashing against the stone pillars, sending spray high into the air. Leo was dancing, trying to catch the foam. My father was holding his hand, but then a distraction, a shout from a fisherman, a moment where my father turned his head to answer a question. A single rogue wave. It didn't look like a monster. It looked like a hand. It swept over the edge of the pier, silent and swift. When my father turned back, the small hand that had been in his was gone. The journal described the next 3 hours in agonizing detail. My mother's scream that tore her throat. My father diving into the freezing, churning black water again and again until the Coast Guard had to forcibly drag him out. His skin blue from hypothermia. They found Leo's yellow raincoat caught on a jagged rock 2 miles downstream the next morning, but they never found Leo. After the tragedy, my parents didn't comfort each other. They became islands. My father blamed his hands, the hands that had let go. That was why he retreated to the basement to fix clocks. He was trying to fix time itself. My mother blamed the music. She believed that if she hadn't been so focused on Leo's piano lessons, he wouldn't have been so full of energy that day. Then a year later, I was born. I was supposed to be a bridge. I was supposed to be the miracle that brought them back to life. But as I read the final pages of the journal, I saw the truth. September 20th, 1997, Maya was born today. She has dark hair, like Julian. She is beautiful. But when I look at her, I don't see a new beginning. I see the space where Leo should be standing. I tried to hold her, but my arms feel like lead. Every time she cries, I hear his voice. I am a ghost raising a child. God forgive me. I don't know how to love her without mourning him. The book fell from my hands. All my life I thought I was unloved because I wasn't good enough. Now I knew the truth. I was unloved because I was a constant reminder of a failure I didn't commit. I took the journal downstairs. I walked into the parlor where the quiet lived. I stood in front of my mother. "He's gone, Mom," I said, my voice cracking. She didn't look up. "Leo is gone, and you've been gone for 20 years. But I'm here. I'm right here." I dropped the journal into her lap. For the first time in my life, she looked at me. Not through me, but at me. Her eyes filled with a sudden, sharp clarity. She looked at the blue silk cover, then up at my face. "Maya," she whispered. Yes, I sobbed. "Maya, your daughter, the one who is still breathing." She reached out a trembling hand and touched my cheek. Her skin was cold, but her touch was light. For a fleeting second, the heavy quiet lifted. "I'm so tired, Maya," she said. "I've been underwater for so long." While my mother was lost in her memories in the living room, my father, Julian, was building his own castle of gears and springs in the basement. After my conversation with my mother, I realized that our family history would not be complete until I descended to the place I had been forbidden to enter all these years. The stairs to the basement had always seemed to me like the entrance to another dimension. It smelled of engine oil, copper, and old wood. When I opened the heavy door, I was greeted by a deafening chorus, thousands of tick-tocks that didn't match up. It was chaos that my father was trying to organize. My father was sitting at his workbench. His back was hunched like an old grandfather's, even though he was barely 50. "I told you not to come here, Maya," he said without turning around. "You can't hide behind the clocks forever, Dad. Mom, read the diary." She finally saw me. "Now it's your turn." He slowly put down his tool and turned on the bright lamp in the corner of the workshop. There, under a glass cover, stood a clock unlike any other. It had no numbers. Instead, the dial was engraved with scenes: the sea, a tree, a small figure of a child, and then another figure a little taller with long hair. It was me. "This clock is not for measuring time," he whispered. "This clock is for turning it back." Every night I tried to create a mechanism that could rewind that November day. I know it's crazy, but it's the only thing that kept me afloat. He came to me, and for the first time, I saw his hands without gloves. They were covered with scars from small parts and burns. When Leo went under the water, my hands felt empty. It's physical pain, Maya. It's like a part of your body has been torn off without anesthesia. I started fixing watches because they're the only things in the world that can be made to work again if they're broken. People, we're not like that. We're broken forever. The next morning, something that had never happened before happened. My father went upstairs wearing his coat and went to my mother. "Elena," he said firmly, "it's time for us to go to the water." We drove in the old car in complete silence. The drive to the pier took 2 hours, but it seemed like an eternity. When we got out of the car, the cold wind from the ocean immediately seeped through our clothes. My mother was shivering, her face as white as chalk. The air in the valley of Blackwood didn't move like the air elsewhere. It felt heavy, saturated with the moisture of the nearby sea and the scent of rotting cedar. In the center of this valley stood our house. To a stranger, it was an architectural masterpiece, a Victorian Gothic structure with jagged gables and windows that looked like tired eyes. To me, it was a rib cage, and we were the organs beating slowly inside it. I remember my 8th birthday, not because of a party or a cake. We didn't do those things, but because of the dust. I spent the afternoon watching dust motes dance in a single shaft of sunlight in the hallway. I gave them names. I imagined they were tiny souls of people who had lived here before, finally free to dance. We were standing in the same place: black rocks, raging foam, and the endless roar of the waves. "I hate that sound," my mother whispered. "It sounds like his name." My father took out of his pocket a small wooden clock he had made in the basement. "We can't bring him back, Elena. We can't start his heart again, but we can stop drowning with him." He threw the figurine into the ocean. We watched as it was picked up by a wave and carried away into the depths. Mother covered her face with her hands and sobbed for the first time in years, not quietly as before, but at the top of her lungs, releasing all the pain that had been building up over decades. When we got home, the house was silent again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was as clean as a blank sheet of paper. That evening, I heard a sound that made my heart stop. It was one note on the piano, then another. I ran into the living room. My mother was sitting at the instrument. Her fingers, which had only been gripping a cup of tea, were now hesitantly touching the keys. It wasn't a beautiful melody. It was snippets, false notes, long pauses, but it was music. I've forgotten how to do it, she said, not looking at me. The memory in my fingers is gone. I'll help you. I sat down next to her. I couldn't play, but I put my hand on hers. We sat like that for hours. My father got up from the basement and for the first time didn't go to his office. He sat in his chair and just listened. The clocks on the walls continued to tick, but now they were not competing with each other. They were moving in unison. But a sad story doesn't just end with a happy ending. Trauma of this magnitude leaves scars that linger for a long time. Even as we started talking, I often caught my mother's eyes on me. She was looking for Leo's features in me. When I laughed, she winced. When I wore yellow, she turned away. I realized that being a replacement child was a special kind of hell. You can never beat a ghost. A ghost is always perfect. A ghost doesn't give bad grades, doesn't argue, doesn't get sick. A ghost is forever a 5-year-old angel. I asked my father one day as we were fixing an old pocket watch together, Dad, if you could take it back, but at the cost of my existence, what would you do? He stopped. His hands froze. He stared at the little gear in his hands for a long time. It was the longest minute of my life. As I entered my late teens, the house on Willow Creek began to feel like a suit of armor that was 3 sizes too small. It protected me from the outside world, but it was suffocating. Every time I looked at my mother, I wondered if she saw me or the boy who wasn't there. Every time I heard my father's clocks, I felt the seconds of my own life ticking away in a house that was stuck in 1995. I'm applying to a university in the city, I announced one evening at dinner. The silence that followed was familiar, but this time it felt different. It was the sound of a glass vase cracking. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, my mother stopped her fork midair. The city, that's 4 hours away, Maya. I need to breathe, Mom. I need to go somewhere where the air doesn't taste like old memories. My father didn't look up from his plate. He just nodded, his jaw tight. He understood. He had spent his whole life trying to master time, only to realize that time is a river that eventually carries everything away. The day I moved out, the house felt strangely light. My suitcases were packed, sitting by the door like soldiers waiting for orders. My mother handed me a small box. Inside was the silver framed photo I had found years ago, the one of her laughing with Julian. I want you to have this, she said. Her voice was stronger now, though she still looked fragile, like porcelain that had been glued back together too many times. Why? I asked. To remind you that happiness existed here once, and to remind you that it's your job to find it again somewhere else. I hugged her, and for the first time, she didn't feel like a ghost. She felt like a mother. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror. My father was standing on the porch, his hand raised in a stiff, awkward wave. He looked small. For the first time, I didn't see a man of stone. I saw a man who was tired of being strong. Life in the city was loud. It was chaotic. It was exactly what I needed. I studied music theory not because I wanted to be a performer like my mother, but because I wanted to understand the math behind the emotion. I wanted to know why certain chords make us cry and why a silence in a song can be more powerful than a crescendo. I met a man named Elias. He was an architect, someone who built things to last. When I told him about my family, I expected him to look at me with pity. Instead, He just took my hand. "Everyone has a haunted room in their heart, Maya," he said. "The trick is not to live in it." But even in the city, the phone calls from home felt like anchors. My mother's health began to decline. It wasn't one specific illness. It was as if her body had finally agreed with her mind that she had stayed too long. I returned home in the autumn of my senior year. The leaves were turning the color of rust, and the air smelled of wood smoke. The house was different. My father had stopped the clocks, all of them. The silence was no longer heavy, it was peaceful. My mother was in a bed set up in the parlor near the piano. She was thin, her skin translucent, but her eyes were clear. "Play for me, Maya," she whispered. "I don't know the pieces, Mom. I only know the theory." "Forget the theory," she said, her voice a mere thread of sound. "Play the space between the notes." It wasn't a masterpiece, it was a confession. As I played, I heard her breathing slow down. It matched the tempo of the music. She died just as the sun was setting, casting a long golden shadow across the piano keys. She didn't struggle. She just stopped, like a watch that had finally run out of tension in its spring. My father came into the room. He didn't cry. He walked over to the largest grandfather clock in the hall, the one he had been working on for 20 years. He reached inside, adjusted a single gear, and started the pendulum. "Tick tock, tick tock, tock. The time is right now," he said quietly. "She's not underwater anymore. She's with him, and we are here." After my mother's funeral, I didn't go back to the city immediately. I stayed in the House of Gray Mist for 3 months. My father and I became like two survivors on a deserted island. We didn't talk much, but we worked. We began the agonizing process of clearing out the rooms. The blue room on the third floor, the nursery, was the hardest. My father stood in the doorway for a long time, clutching the wooden train set. "I used to think that if I kept this room exactly the same, I was keeping him alive," he said, his voice surprisingly steady. "But I realize now I was just keeping him a prisoner, and I was keeping you a prisoner too. We donated the toys, we repainted the walls a warm, creamy white. We opened the windows and let the salt air scrub the smell of dust away. For the first time in my life, the house felt like it was filled with oxygen instead of ghosts." 5 years later, I was standing in a hospital room in the city, holding a bundle wrapped in a white blanket. My son. I named him Leo. Elias, my husband, thought it was a beautiful tribute. My father, when he heard the name over the phone, went silent for a full minute before whispering, "May he have a long story, Maya." But with the birth of my son, the old shadows returned with a vengeance. I became the mother I never wanted to be. I was terrified. Every time he coughed, I saw a funeral. Every time we went near a bathtub, my heart raced. When he took his first steps, I didn't cheer. I braced myself for him to fall. I realized that trauma is a DNA strand. It's a code written in the blood. I was terrified that I would pass the heavy quiet down to him, that he would grow up feeling like he had to be careful not to break his mother. My mother, Elena, sat in a parlor. She always sat in the same velvet armchair, facing a fireplace that was rarely lit. She held a book in her lap, but she never turned the pages. Her fingers would just stroke the leather cover over and over until the surface was worn smooth. "Maya," she called out. Her voice was thin, like a wire stretched too tight. "Yes, mother? Do you hear the metronome?" I listened. The house was dead quiet, save for the wind whistling through the attic vents. "No, mother, there is no metronome." "Exactly," she whispered, and a single tear traced a path through the pale powder on her cheek. "The timing is all wrong. Everything is out of sync." My father's health failed rapidly after he turned 70. He refused to leave the house. He said he wanted to be near the rhythm. I brought little Leo to see him. My son was 3 then, a whirlwind of energy, the polar opposite of the silence my father had cultivated. Leo ran through the halls, his laughter bouncing off the Victorian woodwork. I tried to shush him, out of habit, but my father stopped me. "Let him," my father said, sitting in his armchair. "That's the most beautiful sound this house has ever heard. It's better than any chime I ever built." That night, my father called me to his bedside. He handed me a small, heavy object wrapped in oilcloth. I finished it, he said. It was the clock with no numbers, the one that showed the figures of our family. But he had changed it. He had added a new figure, a tiny child holding a balloon, standing next to me. Time doesn't go backward, Maya, he whispered, his grip on my hand tightening. I spent 40 years trying to prove that it did, but it only goes forward. Promise me, promise me you won't watch the clock. Just live the minutes. He passed away in his sleep that night. He died at 12 a.m. exactly, as if he had timed his exit to the very second. The final test came when Leo was 6. We went back to the valley, back to the pier where the world had once ended for my family. The wind was blowing and the waves were high. My husband Elias was holding Leo's hand. I stood back, my hands clenched into fists, my breath shallow. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, to grab my son and hide him in a room with no windows and no water. But I remembered my father's final words, just live the minutes. Mommy, look, Leo shouted, pointing at the spray. The water is dancing. I walked forward. My legs felt like they were made of lead. I reached out and took Leo's other hand. We stood at the very edge of the stone pier, the three of us. I looked down into the dark, churning water. For the first time, I didn't see a monster. I saw a grave, yes, but I also saw the reflection of the sky. I realized then that my life was not a tragedy. It was a symphony. It had its dark, somber movements, its moments of terrifying dissonance, and its long, lonely silences. But it also had this, the warmth of a child's hand, the strength of a husband's shoulder, and the knowledge that I had survived. I didn't tell Leo about the other Leo that day. That story would come later, when he was old enough to understand that love is worth the risk of loss. As we walked back to the car, I heard a sound. It was faint, carried on the wind from the direction of our old house up on the hill. It sounded like a piano, just a single, clear note hanging in the air like a star. I smiled. The music hadn't stopped. It had just changed keys. A few weeks after my father's funeral, I returned to the house one last time to finalize the sale. I found myself in the small servants' quarters off the kitchen, where Sarah had lived for 30 years. Sarah had passed away shortly after I left for university, but she had left a suitcase behind that no one had ever opened. Inside, tucked between old aprons and a wooden rosary, was a bundle of letters addressed to her sister in Ireland. They were never sent. They were a chronicle of our house's slow decay, written by the only person who was awake while we were all dreaming. December 1995, dear Mary, the light has gone out of this house. It's been a month since the boy was taken by the tide, and I fear the walls are soaking up the grief like damp. Mr. Julian hasn't spoken a word. He spends all night in the basement. I hear the metal clinking, clink, 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 until the sun comes up. And the mistress, oh, Mary, it breaks my heart. She sits in the nursery and rocks an empty cradle. I bring her soup, and she looks right through me as if I'm made of glass. I try to scrub the floors harder, hoping the sound of the brush will drown out the silence, but the silence is winning. September 1997, a girl was born today. They named her Maya. I thought, bless my soul, I thought, this would be the thing to save them. I went into the mistress's room to see the babe. She's a beauty, Mary. Deep eyes, wise as an old owl. But when I put the child in Clara's arms, she didn't coo. She didn't smile. She looked at the baby girl and then looked at the window toward the creek. It's like she's afraid to love her. She thinks the world will just take this one too. I'm the one who wakes up in the night to feed the little one. I whispered to her, "You're a treasure, Maya. Don't you listen to the quiet." As I read Sarah's letters, I saw my own childhood through a stranger's eyes. I realized that Sarah had been my true mother in those early years. She was the one who noticed when I had a fever. She was the one who celebrated my first steps with a secret cookie in the kitchen. June 2005, little Maya is 8 now. She's a ghost in her own home. She walks so quietly you think she was a cat. I saw her today standing outside the third floor door, just listening. My heart bled for her. She knows there's a secret, but no one will give her the key. Julian is obsessed with those clocks. He's built so many that you can't hear your own heartbeat in the hallway. I think he's trying to build a wall of sound to keep the memory of the boy out. But memories don't have ears, Mary. They get in through the cracks. Reading these letters was like finding the missing pieces of a puzzle I had been solving my whole life. I understood now that my parents weren't villains. They weren't even cold. They were just frozen. They were stuck in the second that Leo's hands slipped away, and they didn't know how to restart the clock. I sat on Sarah's narrow bed and cried. I cried for the little girl who walked on tiptoes. I cried for Sarah, who carried our secrets to her grave. And I cried for Leo, the boy who became a ghost before he could become a man. I took the letters to the fireplace in the parlor. One by one, I fed them to the flames. It wasn't an act of destruction, but an act of release. Sarah's words turned into smoke, rising up the chimney and out into the valley air. Goodbye, Sarah, I whispered. Thank you for seeing me. I walked through the house, room by room, touching the walls. I remembered the sadness, yes, but I also remembered the strength it took to survive it. I realized that our family was like a song played on a broken instrument. It wasn't perfect, and it was often out of tune, but it was still a song. 10 years had passed since my father's funeral. I was no longer the girl walking on tiptoes in a house of shadows. I was a woman who had built a life out of sound. I had become a composer, specializing in minimalist music, pieces that relied as much on the silence between the notes as the notes themselves. The call came from the Royal Conservatory. They wanted a headline performance, a piece that explored the architecture of memory. I knew instantly that it was time to play the song I had been writing in my head since I was 7 years old. I titled the piece The Creak and the Clock. My father, Julian, was a man of stone. He was a clockmaker by trade, a profession that required him to disappear into a basement workshop for 14 hours a day. The house was filled with his work. Hundreds of clocks lined the walls, grandfather clocks, cuckoo clocks, tiny gold pocket watches. Every hour, the house would erupt in a chaotic symphony of chimes and bells. For 60 seconds, the silence was shattered, and then, as the last vibration died away, the heavy quiet would return, even more suffocating than before. I used to sit on the basement stairs, watching him through the banisters. He worked under a magnifying lens, his tweezers moving with the precision of a surgeon. He never looked up. He never invited me in. The night of the recital, the theater was packed. The air hummed with the murmurs of the audience, the rustle of programs, and the distant tuning of a cello. I stood backstage, my hands cold. In my pocket, I felt the small wooden deer my father had given me and the faded blue ribbon from Sarah's suitcase. I wasn't alone. I felt the presence of a woman in a velvet chair, a man in a basement workshop, and a boy in a yellow raincoat. "You're on, Maya," the stage manager whispered. I stepped into the light. The applause was a wave, but as I sat at the grand piano, a profound hush fell over the room. It was a heavy quiet, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of it. I was the master of it. I began with a single note, a low, rhythmic G tick, tock, tick, tock. It was the sound of my father's clocks. It was steady, relentless, and lonely. I layered a haunting minor melody over it, the sound of my mother's sighs, the way she used to look at the oak tree. The music felt like gray mist. It felt like a house with locked doors. Then the tempo shifted. I brought in the strings, a chaotic, rushing sound that mimicked the flow of the creek. The audience held their breath. You could almost feel the cold water rising in the room. This was the tragedy. This was the moment the world broke. But then I did something I had never dared to do before. I stopped. I let the silence hang for 5, 10, 15 seconds. In that silence, I wanted the audience to feel the weight of what was lost. I wanted them to feel the years of unsaid I love yous and the meals eaten in total stillness. And then I played a new chord, a major chord, bright, resonant, and defiant. I began to play the melody my mother had hummed on that vinyl cassette tape. I turned it into a celebration. I added the sound of a child's laughter into the rhythm. I played for Sarah, for the cookies in the kitchen, and for the yellow door I had painted in my own home. I wasn't playing for the dead anymore. I was playing for the living. I looked out into the front row. There was Elias holding our son Leo's hand. Leo was leaning forward, his eyes wide, his soul soaking up every vibration. He wasn't afraid of the music. He wasn't a replacement for a ghost. He was just a boy listening to his mother. As I reached the final movement, I felt a strange warmth on my shoulders. It felt like a hand, not the hand of a wave pulling someone under, but the hand of a mother finally letting go. I hit the final note, a high, clear C. I held the pedal, letting the sound vibrate until it was so faint it was almost a memory. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the silence of a tomb, it was the silence of a heartbeat. Then the theater erupted. I stood up, my eyes stinging with tears. I didn't bow to the audience first. I looked up toward the rafters, toward the imaginary attic of my soul. "We're okay now," I whispered. After the concert, we drove back to the valley one last time. We didn't go to the house. It belonged to a new family now, a family that filled it with the smell of pizza and the sound of barking dogs. We went to the creek. Leo ran ahead, throwing sticks into the water. I watched him, and for the first time, my heart didn't seize with terror. I saw the water carry the stick away, and I realized that the creek doesn't just take things, it moves them. It carries the old to make room for the new. I sat on a rock and watched the sunset. The sky was the color of a bruised plum, fading into a soft gold. "Mommy?" Leo called out. "Look, the water is singing." I closed my eyes and listened. He was right. It wasn't a dirge anymore. It was just a song. And finally, after a lifetime of waiting, I knew the words. "Thank you for staying with us through this long journey. Life is a collection of silences and songs, and we are so grateful you chose to share this one with us." If this story moved you, please subscribe to help us tell more and comment below with the word harmony so we know you made it to the very end. Until next time, keep your own music playing. One evening, I gathered the courage to speak. "Father, why do we have so many clocks if no one ever cares what time it is?" He stopped moving. The only sound was his heavy breathing. He didn't turn around. "Because, Maya," he said, his voice gravelly from disuse, "if I can control the seconds, I can convince myself that the years aren't actually passing. If I can fix a broken gear, I can pretend that everything else in this house isn't broken beyond repair." When I was 10, I found the first clue to our family's ghost. It was hidden behind a loose floorboard in my closet. It wasn't a treasure chest or a secret diary. It was a simple, faded blue silk ribbon wrapped around a small lock of golden hair. My hair was black, like my father's. My mother's hair was a deep auburn. Who did this belong to? I took the ribbon to Sarah, our old housekeeper. Sarah was the only person who brought warmth into the house, usually in the form of freshly baked bread that smelled like a world I wanted to live in. When I showed her the ribbon, she dropped the tray she was holding. The sound of shattering porcelain felt like a gunshot. "Where did you find that, child?" she hissed, her eyes darting toward the parlor where my mother sat. "In my room. Sarah, who does this belong to?" She grabbed my wrist, her grip firm. "You listen to me, Maya. You put that back. You bury it deep. This house is a wound that refuses to scab over. Don't go picking at it." "Was there another child?" I asked, my heart hammering. Sarah didn't answer. She just began to sob, quietly, into her apron. And in that moment, I knew. The silence in our house wasn't empty. It was occupied. The truth began to unravel on the night of the great gale. The wind was so strong it felt as though it wanted to peel the roof off the house. The clocks all seemed to lose their minds, chiming at the wrong times. their pendulum swinging violently. I heard a scream from third floor. It wasn't a scream of pain, but of recognition. I ran up the stairs, past my father, who was standing paralyzed in the hallway, and into the attic. The door, usually locked, had been blown open by the pressure. Inside, my mother was on her knees. She had dragged a massive trunk into the center of the room. It was filled with toys, small wooden horses, hand painted soldiers, and a tiny violin. "He's cold, Julian," she shrieked as my father entered behind me. "The water is so cold. Why didn't you catch him?" My father fell to his knees beside her. He didn't try to comfort her. He just put his head in his hands and let out a sound I will never forget, a low, guttural howl of a man who had been holding his breath for a decade. His name was Leo, my father whispered to the air. He was 5. He wanted to see the waves during the storm. I told him to stay on the pier. I told him. After the night of the storm, the silence in our house changed. It was no longer a stagnant pool, it was a hungry void. My mother had retreated into a state of catatonia, her eyes open, but her spirit clearly elsewhere. My father had returned to his basement, the frantic ticking of 1,000 clocks, his only company. I found myself drawn back to the attic. I needed to know who Leo was. I needed to know why I had been raised in the shadow of a ghost. Tucked deep inside the trunk of toys, hidden beneath the velvet lining, I felt something hard. A book. It was bound in faded blue silk, the same color as the ribbon I had found. This was my mother's journal. As I opened the first page, the scent of dry jasmine and old grief wafted up.